IndyCar coverage is brought to you by the Big Machine Music City Grand Prix. Click the link in the description and use my promo code DAVIDLAND20 to save 20% and support IndyCar oval racing. And after tonight, I think you definitely need to buy your tickets to Nashville because the oval track package, the rumors of its demise were unfounded, as it turns out. Listen, we have got a ton of stuff to talk about, both positive and negative. But I don't want the negative to totally outweigh the positives of tonight, because I think there is a possibility that it will. Because yes, the negative was overwhelmingly negative, but I think we really, really need to focus on the fact that all of the stuff that happened tonight was the best thing that could have happened to IndyCar post-Olympics. All of the drama, all of the discussion, the talking points, the beef, whatever you want to call it, in addition to the fact that IndyCar, I think, brought the best and most exciting racing that I've ever seen at Gateway to the public tonight. It was the most exciting Gateway race I think I've ever seen, start to finish. The fact that there was the ability to pass, the second lane was not a gimme, but it was there. The ability to pass was there. And more so to the point, the short oval IndyCar package that we saw tonight was the polar opposite, first of all, of the two races we saw in Iowa. Those races were disastrous. But this was exactly the type of racing, the exact type of short oval IndyCar racing that I fell in love with. The type of racing that when I advocate for short ovals, like Milwaukee, like Gateway, and obviously like Nashville, we need traffic, we need big speed differences between the cars, we need different strategies, and we need them to be able to pass each other. And we checked every single box today. We had great battles up at the front of the field, in the middle of the field, and at the back of the field. And the great part of how everything worked out with the speeds of the cars and the different strategies and the ability for the faster cars to pass the slower ones, we saw all of those battles, both in the front, mid, and back of the field, constantly intermingling with each other. Lap traffic was truly a factor, and that's what you need. This is the thing about short track IndyCar racing. It doesn't need to be a conga line. The cars don't all need to be within a mile per hour of each other. That's bad racing on a short track in IndyCar racing. What you want it to look like is a multi-class sports car race. That is what the best IndyCar oval racing is. And we had that today. We had that today in spades. It was, to me, a spectacular, incredibly enjoyable race for the first 100 and what is it? It's 140 lap or 240 lap race, right? So the first 220 laps, absolutely bliss, completely enjoyable. Loved it. The racing at the start was absolutely spectacular and made me just kind of go, holy smokes, they can race each other. I was so happy to see the top lane come in, side-by-side racing, and not the NASCAR kind of side-by-side racing, just the damn fact that they could get side-by-side and make moves on each other, whether it was on the outside totally, whether it was slicing down to the inside of the corner, whether it was kind of baiting a guy to drive it into the corner too deep underneath and then make a crossover move. Guys like Marcus Ericsson, Colton Herta were making great moves by crossing guys over. That was super awesome and exciting. But one of the best sequences of IndyCar racing I have seen in the longest time, probably since Texas of 2023, and really this might have been the best IndyCar race since Texas of 2023 in terms of what I like to see in an IndyCar race, was the battle in lap traffic between Josef Newgarden and Scott McLaughlin. To me, that was everything I wanted to see in an IndyCar race. That was exactly what, if you ever ask David, you ask me, because sometimes people go, oh, you just hate everything. Oh, you hate road course. That's what I wanted to see, okay? The two leaders having to battle through lap traffic, find the best way through lap traffic, and also have to fight each other. And Josef Newgarden, in that lap traffic, had to make a slight correction, and it cost him. Well, at least it looked like it would. Spun out, brought out the yellow. Huge drama, huge excitement. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. And then it all kind of fell apart. it all kind of fell apart. It wasn't all bad because the strategy was still exciting, and the strategy even split from there because really it was a battle of the top. We really had 4 drivers who were above and beyond everybody else today. It was the 3 Penske cars of Power, McLaughlin, and Newgarden, as well as David Malukas, who is a gateway master. No matter what car he is in, he's up at the front battling the Penskes at this racetrack, and he was doing it once again. So when Newgarden spun, obviously Newgarden had to pit, but McLaughlin decided to pit as well. Power and Malukas both stayed out. That kept most of the field at least 1 lap down, if not, in some cases, 2 laps down. The purist in me loves that. I love to see that. But then it was looking like it was going to be a battle for the win between Will Power and David Malukas. Now, they were still on an alternate strategy from Newgarden and McLaughlin, but it looked like they were going to do everything right because Newgarden and McLaughlin still had to make an additional pit stop. Power and Malukas pitted under the green flag and were coming back through the field to try to chase down the number 2 and number 3 cars. And there became a realization when you knew that Newgarden and McLaughlin were going to have to pit again, that the battle for the win was going to be decided in lap traffic between Will Power and David Malukas. And Malukas got a great run in traffic behind Will Power, and then they made contact. And initially, on the first replay or the first live shot, now I was calling it, if you guys were members of the DL 500 Club, you were watching along with me. When I saw Malukas make the move, I was like, he's got to do it. He's got to do it. This is for the win. And he stuck it down in there. And what NBC showed us initially was Will Power's onboard. And from Will Power's onboard, it was hard because the camera was moving to the side. It looked like Malukas just kind of squeezed his way in there and, bit off more than he could chew, which would make sense, bit of a desperation move. It looked like at the time. You have to do it. You had to pass Will Power there because that was for the race win. Well, Will Power knew that too. And then when we brought the shot out to a wide shot of the 2 cars going into that corner, it was very, very clear that Will Power pinched David Malukas and spun him into the wall. Now, the question, of course, is why was that not considered an avoidable contact penalty? I'm not really sure. Maybe race control thought that David Malukas was a bit overambitious to do that, but I thought this was supposed to be a 2-lane racetrack, right? I thought this was a racetrack that we did a highline session to make sure that outside lane was ready to go. I thought the cautions were 20 minutes long because you're sweeping the outside lane so that it is a 2-lane racetrack. And so if that is the case, and David Malukas was legitimately alongside of Will Power really did not need to move into the inside lane and crowd David Malukas and ultimately make contact with him and spin him into the wall. And so that's the first real question that I have for race control is why was Will Power not given an avoidable contact penalty for that? It would seem that meets all of the criteria to me of avoidable contact. Was there an oil slick or debris that Will was avoiding for some reason? I would even make the argument that he drove into the wake of the lapped car that was ahead of him, who I believe was Christian Lundgaard. Now, if you're an IndyCar driver and you're driving with aerodynamic downforce on the front of your race car, you do not, in the middle of the corner, if you have a choice about it, drive into the wake of another car for any reason, if you can avoid it. And there just didn't seem any unavoidable reason that Will Power needed to be in that spot on that racetrack with David Malukas to the inside of him. And it really isn't an excuse for not giving him a penalty based on that criteria. Now listen, race control has been a bit lax with it. At Indy, someone sent me a video of Scott Dixon taking out Ryan Hunter-Reay. In hindsight, that should have been a penalty too, and it wasn't. Okay? So maybe there's a standard on racetracks where you're approaching speeds of 200 miles an hour just to chop down on somebody if you're side by side, and that's not worthy of a penalty. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I guess the standards are really laxadays, right? Well, we'll talk about that here in just a second. Because the thing that everybody wants to talk about is that restart where Josef Newgarden brought the field down slower than I've ever seen at Gateway. Maybe not an initial start, although I can remember one initial start, maybe 2020, that was super slow and caused an accident. Well, this one caused an accident too. And it was willpower, perhaps we could call it karma, getting run over the back of by Alexander Rossi and many more cars becoming involved. Romain Grosjean, an innocent bystander, as well as Jack Harvey making contact with Nolan Siegel and going into the wall after really Jack was having a pretty solid day for Dale Coyne Racing. So a really unfortunate situation there for Alexander Rossi as well. He was primed to have a really good finish and ended up almost being the third car in as many Indy car races to go upside down. So we need to talk about the Josef Newgarden accident and exactly my thoughts on it. So the very initial, my eyeballs looking at it right off the bat said to me, what was Josef doing on the restart? That was my very first reaction to it. And then there was the question of whether or not Josef was backing up the field, lifting off. Will Power definitely thought he knew what the issue was because he jumped over the wall and flipped off Josef Newgarden. So from my perspective, especially seeing the replay with Josef Newgarden on board, he was either riding the brakes or he was kind of blipping the throttle ever so slightly. And maybe the reason Josef didn't get a penalty, because Josef was not penalized for this, okay? Josef was not penalized for this, despite the fact that he slowed down enough that the car behind him, Scott McLaughlin, got into the back of him and at one point was pushing him, and 3 or 4 cars got into each other, one of them almost getting upside. Again, safety perspective, that's unacceptable that happened in the first place. But just the fact that Josef brought the field down in a way that hadn't been done before in that race especially. And I get it. I get if you're a competitor, you're trying to gain an advantage over the other competitors. I understand that part of it. And maybe there isn't a specific rule on the books right now that says you cannot bring the field down at an incredibly slow pace. But Newgarden, his explanation for the restart was they threw the green before I went. Now, I've been watching IndyCar my entire life. I'm 31 years old, okay? My understanding was, and I could be wrong, they could have changed the rule, and I might not know it, and I plead ignorance on this one if I do be proven to be wrong. But IndyCar racing has always been a lot different than stock car racing in that the starter waves the green flag and the race begins. It is not the pole sitter who controls whether or not the green flag comes out or not. The starter decides. The person waving the flag decides when that race is green. So it doesn't matter when IndyCar decided to throw the green flag, whether or not Josef Newgarden was going or not. That is not what is to blame for this accident. What might be to blame for this accident is the fact that on the onboard, you could hear Josef Newgarden's engine changing in pitch, and you could tell from the other cars in line that, yes, maybe some of the other drivers were accelerating, and Josef wasn't specifically not accelerating, although he may have been dragging the brake. I think that IndyCar should take a hard look at the data and see what happened. But I would be shocked. There has to be a rule. If there isn't, it's nuts that you can't. There has to be a rule that you can't brake check on a restart. And if he's found to have been doing it, I don't know what you can do, but maybe you need to do something, even if it's to make a rule to say, yeah, you can't do that, sort of thing. And I'm not saying change the rule that the control car, don't do any of this NASCAR bullshit. We don't need it, okay? We don't need it. But what we do need is consistency from the guys restarting the race. And when a guy like Will Power, and I get it, Will Power wrecked David Malukas, and I've already admonished him for that. But when a guy like Will Power, who's been in the sport, his first race was 2005, sees it, calls it like it is, and says, the lead car was the problem, I tend to believe him on that. So the restart was under review and no penalty came. And Josef Newgarden completely changed his strategy the next restart, absolutely blasted away early, much earlier than he had earlier, ran away from Scott McLaughlin, and won this race. Spin and win, spectacular win, very exciting. But on that restart, and this is where I understand by the letter of the law why this happened, but optically, it was a very, 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 very bad look. On the restart, Linus Lundqvist got an amazing restart, was passing a ton of guys. We're going to talk about Linus Lundqvist a little bit later in this video because the dude is trying his best and I think succeeding to earn himself a job in IndyCar next year. But Linus was getting a huge run off of turn number 2 behind Colton Herta. Colton slammed the door on him. Definitely made what I would consider to be, at best, a borderline reactionary move, at worst, a block. IndyCar saw it as a block. But here's the thing. Linus got around. There wasn't even contact between the two cars. Linus didn't have to go in the grass. Herta did let him by once he got there, okay? So, at least from what I've seen in the past, in terms of a bad block or a block that's like unacceptably bad, Herta's was probably like a 3 or 4 on the Richter scale, okay? It's not a 10. So after the race, with Josef Newgarden standing in victory lane, you hear Kevin Lee of NBC say, there's going to be a penalty. And you go, uh-oh, what's this going to be? And you hear it's for Herta blocking. Optically, that's not good. It's a real bad look. Even if by the letter of the law, maybe there's not a rule that you can't do the restart that Josef did and wreck a whole bunch. So here's the worst part. And it's not just the fact that, we have Penske cars doing things and not getting penalized and an Andretti car doing something and getting penalized. We have a situation that was created by Josef Newgarden that did result in 4 cars getting wrecked. Okay? Potentially, God only knows what might have happened. I mean, again, anytime an Indy car gets nose up in the air, like Alexander Rossi, you don't know what's going to happen. It becomes a very unpredictable element at that point. We saw what happened with Stingray Robb at Iowa. We saw what's happened with Santino Ferrucci at Toronto. Anytime a situation like that is created, it is an extremely dangerous situation. So the fact that a crash was caused by what Josef Newgarden did on that restart, and the fact that a crash was not caused, and in fact, no contact, no cars going below nothing way, oh my God, that's too dangerous with the Herta Lundqvist thing. The fact that got a penalty and the crash that Will Power caused and the crash that Josef Newgarden caused did not get penalties, optically horrible look for race control. And they've had a bad year. Let's be real clear. They've had a bad year. But this was tough. This was tough. And yeah, it's disappointing that the negativity of this whole situation is going to overshadow the positives of this race, which was that it was a fantastic oval race. We saw IndyCar drivers doing what they do best. We saw lap traffic finally being a factor. It's so nice to see. If you ask me what I want to see on an oval race, this is what I want to see. I want to see this at the Indy 500. I don't care if there's 4 cars on the lead lap. It's a better show if cars are passing each other, regardless of whether it's for position or not, okay? The people who are drinking 25 beers in the grandstand, they don't care. All that matters is the top 2 cars are close and they're passing guys. And this is exactly what we need to. This is exactly the type of race the IndyCar should put on all the time. Loved it. Can't wait for 2 in Milwaukee. Can't wait for 1 in Nashville. You should definitely buy your tickets. Code DavidLand20 down in the description. But yeah, a couple more shout outs to give because it is a positive. It is exciting. It does narrow the championship up a little bit, although Alex Palou had a great day staying out of trouble, and it helped his championship a lot. But guys like Newgarden and McLaughlin are now kind of sliding into position as well. Nolan Siegel led some laps Obviously, he did it on strategy, but he's beginning to look like he's getting his feet wet, beginning to get comfortable in the Arrow McLaren team. So I think he had a pretty solid race outside of one speeding penalty, but you could say that about Kyle Larson too. And so I would say that's pretty good company for Nolan Siegel, but especially so Linus Lundqvist. He's had a couple of flashes of brilliance throughout his season. And Barber was one of them, and this looked a lot like Barber, where he just stuck with it, was in prime position to take advantage on a late race restart, and got a podium. Linus is showing some mettle. He's showing some real talent. And obviously we know the situation at Ganassi, the question about how many cars they're going to cut. What is the status of the 66 car? How much does Chip Ganassi have say in who goes there or who doesn't go there? And where the drivers will end up shaking out who are currently at Ganassi, who might not be at Ganassi next year, at least full time. So Linus did everything he needed to do, but Marcus Armstrong, I think, had a very solid oval race as well. Both of those drivers did solidly today, no doubt about it. So I did a lot of waffling. I can't imagine that there isn't a lot of discussion going on in the comments right now. What do you think about Josef Newgarden, about Colton Herta, about Linus Lundqvist, about Will Power, David Malukas? I'll say this again. This, overall, probably positive for IndyCar because we're all going to be talking about it. We're all going to be ready for the next race at Portland and certainly ready for potentially a beat 'em up, smack 'em up race at Milwaukee, and then of course the season finale. If the season finale is anywhere close to this at Nashville, again, you're going to want to buy your tickets. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more IndyCar content, and I'll see you in the next video.